Hello and welcome to my July monthly wrap-up. Now this past month I ended up reading 8 books, which I was fairly surprised by because it felt as if my attention span was really lacking this last month. Most of the books I ended up reading were quite short, so that leads itself to why I read so much. However, they were 8 books nonetheless, so I am proud. I did end up either borrowing from the library or a friend, reading ebooks or listening to audiobooks over the past month, so I don't have any physical copies to hold up to camera and show you. So just like last month, I'm going to insert a cover of the book just off to the side for a little bit of a visual reminder and cue as to which book I'm talking about. Now with all of that preamble said and done, let's dive right into the book reviews. The first book that I read, or rather the first book that I listened to, was Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by DeGrasse Tyson. Now, I adored this book. It was a really short, succinct summary of the field of study. Full disclosure, I did take one physics course at university, and it was an astrophysics course. So all of this was already familiar to me. However, I truly believe that if you know nothing about the area of study before going into this book is a really great introduction. DeGrasse Tyson did a great job. Are we surprised? Oh no, how long was that like that? I would definitely recommend this book if you have any interest whatsoever in the field of astrophysics, or if you are already familiar but perhaps at a more beginner level, like I would say that I am. I really enjoyed this book. Next, a much different book was Once Upon a Dream by Simone. Now this is a collection of stories. Allegedly, it's a collection of novellas, and obviously I don't know the final word count, so it very well these could technically be classified as novellas, but for me these felt much more like short stories in terms of the length, in terms of the depth of the plot, as well as the depth to the characters. This is an erotica collection, so it gets very steamy very quickly. That's kind of the whole purpose, and it is all based around fairy tales. So I really enjoyed this. I found this for free on the Kobo e-store one night while I was struggling to get to sleep, so I downloaded it, read the whole thing, and then I fell asleep, but it was great. It was a good way to pass an evening. The main premise of each story is exploring taboo, so it definitely gets quite explicit, and I don't really have much more to say about it other than that. I enjoyed this. I wouldn't say it's my new favorite short story collection or novella collection. I think I gave it 3 stars. It definitely intrigued me though to pick up more by this author, so I am going to be on the lookout for more books by Simone, or more works by Simone. The next book that I read was actually a reread, and it was also a buddy read with a friend of mine over on Instagram who goes under the handle Avid Bookworm, which I will link below if you want to check them out. And that was Eragon by Christopher Paolini. Now, me and Avid Bookworm are doing a reread of this series because both of us haven't finished this series. I've not read Inheritance, so I've not read the conclusion to this series, even though I read the first books a few years ago now. I came to this series quite a bit later than most people I know, so I don't have all of that nostalgia tied up to it, clearly, if I haven't finished it, right? So the first time that I read Eragon, I only gave it 3 stars. This time around, I think I enjoyed it a lot more and probably would have rated it around a 4-star mark. I mean, the writing hasn't changed. The writing is still fairly simple. It leans towards the younger end of YA. If you don't know anything about the inheritance cycle, it introduces us to the world of Allegasia and Eragon, who, while he is out hunting one day, stumbles across what he believes to be a beautiful blue rock. alas, it is more than a rock. It is discovered that he has found a dragon egg. And in Allegasia, dragon riders have become something of myth and legend because there is this evil king who is the only current dragon rider, and he has thwarted any other dragon rider, and he is hoarding the dragons for himself in an attempt to maintain power. So Eragon finds this dragon egg, the egg hatches, and he bonds with the dragon, who he names Saphira. And I definitely found this a heartwarming story the second time around. The next book that I read was a nonfiction book, and that was Dreyer's English by Benjamin Dreyer. This is a short, succinct little style guide all about grammar and punctuation and how to tighten up your writing and make it concise. And that is not something that I am particularly great at, so I did really enjoy this book. I, however, rated it 4 stars, not 5, because there were a few things that didn't sit well with me. One of them was Dreyer's vehement dislike for the singular they, which just felt so outdated. In fact, he did use his age as a thinly veiled excuse. So I looked into it, and he's in his early 60s. And I have a grandmother who's in her early 80s, and she can use they, them pronouns no problem. So that didn't sit well with me. The other thing is just how the book was formatted, and this is a personal gripe of mine that's a carryover from my university days, but I really dislike footnotes when they're used for anything more than just plain old citations. And Dreyer used footnotes as a way to try and inject more humor in his writing. He used them to continue sentences in the same vein of thought that was really relevant to the argument he was making up in the body text. And I personally am of the opinion that you should be able to skip over footnotes and not miss any of the argument or the main points, and that wasn't always the case with Dreyer. So this book was a 4-star, definitely really useful. I definitely wrote down a few grammar tidbits that were new to me or were handy reminders, but I'm not sure if I would entirely recommend this one, or if I did recommend it, I would recommend it with the previous caveat. I listened to another audiobook this past month, and that was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I am so grateful that I read this book. It's been on my TBR for far too long for me to have been passing it up, and I think it is an incredible, poignant read. This is told through letters that Coates is writing to his son, which feels very reminiscent of James Baldwin. And in those letters, you can really hear and feel the love and the fear that Coates has for his son growing up Black in America. And the emotion is so raw and tangible in his writing. It is an incredible piece of literature. It's one of those books where it's a struggle because I wouldn't necessarily say that I enjoyed it, but I think this is such a necessary read. And like I said, I'm just so grateful that I made the time finally. This has been on my TBR for far too long, and I would definitely recommend anyone to pick this one up. And then this is where my brain 100% shifted into only being able to focus on romance books. And that is completely fine. That is what I needed in that moment. I listened to what I was craving, and I think it's really important that you do that so that you're still experiencing joy when you're reading, and at the end of the day, that's the whole point. So first we have The Governess Game by Tessa Dare, and I've already spoken, even though I haven't had this channel for long, I've already spoken about how much I love Tessa Dare, and I'm sensing a trend that I will continue to speak about how much I love Tessa Dare. In The Governess Game, we meet Alex as she goes to the home of Chase, who is our rogue duke in this scenario. in order to inquire about setting his clocks, because that is how she makes her livelihood. And Chase mistakes her for a governess, which he is in dire need of because he has two young girls, two young orphans who are in his care, and they have kind of wreaked havoc on all of his previous governesses. They've gone through a whole slew of them. So Chase meets Alex and offers her the post because she rightfully puts him in his place for being a awful rake when she first meets him. Alex initially declines, but circumstances change and suddenly she finds herself in need of the money that Chase promised. So she goes back to his home and takes up the post. And I adored this book. I loved the addition of the rambunctious, meddlesome children who develop a really strong love of pirates because, I mean, who wouldn't love the idea of pirates? I love the idea of pirates. And Alex actually grew up on a ship. Her father was a trader, so she has this pirate connection almost and is able to teach them and connect with these girls in that way. And then obviously it is romance, so something happens between Alex and Chase, something happens between the governess and the Duke, and there is a confession of love in a bookstore, and there's also a steamy scene in a library, which are two of my favorite things. So I love that. This wasn't my favorite of the series, so I think I gave it 3.5, 4 stars, but I loved it and I had a really good time reading it. I'm sorry if absolutely everything from lighting to the camera angle just changed, but my camera battery died, so I had to quickly recharge it, and now we are back, and I only have 2 more books to talk about, so I'm going to try and go through them quite quickly so that doesn't happen to me again. The next book that I read was Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade, and this was such a cute book. It was like one giant love letter to fandoms and fandom culture. There are a lot of moving parts within this book, so in an attempt to explain it as simply as possible, our couple meet online where they both write fan fiction, Marcus and April, and they become each other's beta reader. They become really, really close, good friends. However, what April doesn't know, because it would be a huge violation of his contract, is that Marcus is actually one of the main stars in the show they're writing about. He becomes unhappy with his character's progression and his character's story, so he turned to fan fiction as a fix-it to write what he thought his character should be going through. So that's kind of the background, and then things happen online and Marcus, the TV star, ends up asking out April, the cosplayer, and during the course of their first date, Marcus realizes that April is his best online friend, and he doesn't tell her. So a little bit complicated, quite a few moving parts, but it gets resolved in a really endearing and realistic way, I would say. There's not just like a kiss and make up scene. It is very emotional and raw and feels realistic for the deceit that went on and for the length of time. Another thing that Dade does exceptionally well, especially since this is her debut, is April is a plus-sized woman, and Dade doesn't shy away from her experience as a plus-sized woman and how that has affected her to this day, and how that has created really strained relationships with her parents. I'm a mid-sized woman and I cannot relate to April's story. However, there were certain sentiments that I myself have felt, and I know how hurt I felt, and I only received just a tiny piece of what other women experience on a day-to-day basis. So It was raw and emotional. I loved the positive plus-sized rep in this book though, and I'm really looking forward to checking out more of Dade's writing. If you have ever taken part in fandom culture or that online fandom world and you're comfortable with reading about explicit sex, then I would definitely recommend checking out this book and reading the description at the very least, because it's such a cute, endearing story while also touching on some really serious issues and treating them with respect in a realistic manner. I gave this book 4 stars and would definitely recommend. The last book that I read in July was Romancing the Duke by Tessa Dare, and I don't think we are surprised that if I was in a romance mood, there were at least 2 Tessa Dare books here. This is the first in her Castles Ever After series, which is a brand new series to me, and we have a crumbling castle as a backdrop, which I love. Isolde Ophelia Goodnight, or rather Izzy as she goes by, is the daughter of a famed author and is regarded as England's sweetheart. However, what none of her father's fans know is that upon his death, she was left practically destitute and has almost nothing to her name. So when she unexpectedly inherits a derelict castle from a godfather that she barely knew, she will do anything to maintain her claim on it, including cohabit and befriend and perhaps fall in love with the Duke who claims the castle is still rightfully his and who refuses to leave. I loved it. It's, of course, everything that I've come to know and love from Dare, with a few unexpected twists that made it all the more endearing and intriguing to me. This was another 4-star read and I would highly recommend. That's a roundup of all the books that I read in July. If you're still watching, thank you very much. Let me know down in the comments if you have read any of the books that I mentioned, or let me know what you read during the month. As well, let me know if you like how I list my books read in chronological order, or if you would prefer me to list them from least to most enjoyed, most to least, or even by genre. And I will be back soon with a new video. Bye for now.